Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Now, just like the rest of the world, Africa's aviation industry has been massively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The International Air Transport Association, or IATA if you prefer, projections towards the end of last year forecast that the continent's aviation recovery will be a lot weaker than expected. In fact, it might be just 30% of traffic and revenue levels that we saw back in 2019. Now, in absolute numbers, the region's expected to see around 45 million travelers in 2020, maybe rising to 70 million travelers this year. A full return to 2019 levels of 155 million travelers running around the continent is not expected until at least 2023. Now, though domestic travel, to be fair, is picking up across the continent as countries reopen their borders, international travel remains heavily constrained amid the discovery of new COVID-19 variants. So what then should you expect as far as African aviation, and even global aviation really, is concerned? Let's explore some options. John Strickland is the director at JLS Consulting. He joins us now live on the line from London. John, good to see you on the program. So let's start with what we need to get people flying once again. Vaccine passports have gotten a lot of attention as one way of getting people to fly safely again. But assuming we actually implement it, between airlines and health authorities, what do we need to do to make that a reality?
I think, first of all, we need to have a much greater efforts from governments worldwide to work together to take a standardized approach to regulation and controls of air travel. We're seeing every government doing its own thing. Even here in Europe, there are differences in approach from one country to another. We see that also in other continents, including Africa. Now, airlines, by their very nature, are flying between not just cities, but continents every day, and trying to manage a constantly changing rule book in terms of building passenger confidence and being able to plan schedules is proving to be pretty impossible. Quarantines may be a rather blunt tool being used right now. Vaccinations, hopefully, as they start to take hold, will reduce the need for that. But airlines have to have a framework which is consistent across countries and which they can inform customers about and plan their own schedules. That's the only way we're going to get to a meaningful recovery in travel.
Ideally, that should be fairly straightforward for large blocks like the EU, for example, or the US because of the sheer size of that particular market. But what exactly would be the basic building blocks here? What are the bare minimums that airlines can agree on and say, OK, fine, we'll agree with, say, leaving middle rows open, like what Delta's decided to do?
Well, one thing that airlines have been asking for globally is testing before departure. That's a key element in trying to make sure that nobody actually boards an aircraft who is affected already or infected by the virus, and there are means to do that. But again, it requires a working with the authorities in terms of methodology, in terms of costings of that. Leaving middle seats free, for example, yes, Delta has agreed to extend that, but it's not a permanent solution because capacity taken out ultimately means that either ticket prices are affected upwardly or airlines lose money in their operations. There has to be more of an effort to ensure that we don't have passengers boarding in the first instance, and that then confidence is built in terms of processes going through airports to maintain social distancing, boarding the aircraft, simplifying processes in baggage collection, and that means more automation in the whole travel process. And airlines themselves have already introduced a lot of efforts in terms of deep cleaning onboard aircraft, the way in which crews themselves are tested pre and post flight. There's a lot of work being done already, but it's a long, slow process because, of course, we are still very much in the midst of this pandemic right now.
Indeed. So last October, IATA did forecast they don't expect to see traffic, at least across Africa, getting back to 2019 levels, at least until 2023. So two questions using that as a baseline. One, it does imply that African carriers will have a lot of free capacity. And B, it also does imply that a lot of the aircraft they bought on leasing terms will be a bit challenging, for lack of a better word. So how do lessors then adjust to that free fall in demand?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we're seeing, as you mentioned in your intro, most international flights grounded currently. We were 85% down globally last year, so there was not a market that wasn't touched. There are swaths, thousands of airlines, aircraft grounded all over the world. A lot of that capacity is being permanently retired. Other parts of their airlines fleets are grounded for long-term periods, running certainly into months. It's not a question of days or weeks, but much of that capacity has to be maintained from a point of view of the integrity of the aircraft in terms of operating systems. It requires engineering, requires inspection on a regular basis. So there's a lot of cost, even for airlines that are virtually hibernating, and they're spending millions of dollars every day just to exist. So yes, some capacity has to be disposed of, costs have to be cut, the loss of blood going out in cash drain every day has to be minimized. That's the key focus. Now, many of Africa's airlines were already financially challenged even before this pandemic. This only adds salt to the wounds, a significant amount of salt. It's really damaging. So that effort has to be uppermost in the minds of airline managements. And the leasing companies themselves, who are providing aircraft to many of the world's airlines, they themselves are looking at the health of their customers. Where they can, they are giving payment holidays and improved credit terms, but of course they have to manage their own risk. They will only do that to those airlines where they are confident they will come back with a successful return to business in due course, even if that is in the process of years down the line. And again, different leasing companies have different aircraft in their portfolio. Now the big question is, what aircraft will be the most popular in the future? And again, fuel efficient aircraft, probably typically smaller aircraft in all categories, are going to be in greater demand, and that's where we will see a shift in terms of inventory amongst the leasing companies and for the airlines themselves who actually buy aircraft.
One last question for you, John, very quickly, because we've got 30 seconds on this. It sounds like there's a lot of risk to go around here. Ultimately, does that eventually have to end up on public balance sheets being borne by government?
Not necessarily. Certainly in the case of Africa, many airlines are publicly owned, but we've seen a lot of examples around the globe of airlines raising liquidity on their own account, but that is only a reflection of how well those airlines are managed. Airlines can't go out and raise liquidity if they don't demonstrate they have sound business plans and capable management. And a challenge, again, we see quite often, sadly, in Africa is political interference in the running of airlines. I've never, to be honest, seen a politician who knows how well to run an airline as a good airline manager. So the more the political hands can be off and the more airlines can be run by competent management, the better chances are of recovery and the less need for excess debt to be taken on.
Indeed. John Strickland, Director, JLS Consulting. Thank you very much for your input this evening.